I sat on the floor of our home office, the heavy, leather-bound church ledger open across my knees, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The numbers didn't just fail to add up. They told a story of a betrayal so deep it made my skin crawl. It wasn't just the money. It was the names, the dates, and the person she was spending it on. My hands were shaking so violently that the pages fluttered, a mocking sound in the dead silence of the house. I looked at a line item for community outreach, and then at a printed credit card statement I'd found tucked in the back pocket of the binder. They matched to the penny, but the outreach was a luxury boutique hotel 3 towns over. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why that night destroyed everything, I need to take you back to where it started. To understand how my saintly wife turned our life into a lie, I have to take you back to the beginning, before I knew that the woman I loved was a thief in more ways than one. Aleda and I were the couple everyone in Oak Creek looked up to. We'd been married for 12 years, and if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you we were the luckiest people on earth. We had the house with the wraparound porch, the Friday night tradition of ordering pizza from Tony's and watching old movies, and a marriage that felt unshakable. Elena was the kind of person who'd bake a casserole for a stranger just because she heard they had a cold. She was a pillar of Grace Community Church, always the first to volunteer for the bake sale or the clothing drive. When she stepped up to take over as the church treasurer, I was so proud of her. I remember toasting her with a glass of wine on our porch. I told her, "Honey, they couldn't have picked a more honest person. You're the conscience of this town." We even had great neighbors. Mark lived right next door, a bachelor who'd moved in 3 years ago. He was a guy's guy, always over for barbecues, helping me rake leaves, or grabbing a beer while we talked about the game. It felt like the perfect suburban life. The first crack happened on a Tuesday in October. It was such a small thing, really. Alina was late for dinner, which never happened. When she finally walked in around 8 p.m., she looked flushed, her hair slightly messy, and her eyes had this frantic brightness to them. She said she'd been sorting out a massive discrepancy in the church books with the pastor and a few board members. I believed her without a second thought. But when she leaned in to kiss me, I noticed a scent on her. Not her usual vanilla perfume, but something sharp, masculine, and expensive. It was a cologne I recognized instantly because I'd smelled it every time I stood downwind of Mark's charcoal grill. That should have been my first warning. But what came next was so much worse. If that was all I found, maybe I could have let it go. Maybe I would have convinced myself I was being paranoid. But then the pattern started to shift. A few weeks later, I was cleaning the kitchen when Elena's phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the shower. A text flashed from an unsaved number. The deposit went through. See you at the cabin. My heart did a slow, painful roll in my chest. When she came out, wrapping a towel around her hair, I asked her about it. She didn't even blink. She laughed it off with that sweet, melodic laugh I'd always loved. "Oh, David, don't be silly. That's just the church's retreat fund for the youth group. I have to coordinate the deposits with the site manager. He's a bit of a direct texter."
She was so smooth, so incredibly smooth. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to grow into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I started noticing that the retreats were happening more and more often. Elena was volunteering every other weekend, claiming the church was audited and she needed to spend 48 hours straight in the office. Meanwhile, Mark, our friendly neighbor, was suddenly out of town on business at the exact same times. I felt like I was losing my mind. You know that feeling when your whole world just stops? When you're looking at your life and realize you might be the only person living in reality? I decided to do something I'm not proud of. I waited until she went to her treasurer's meeting on a Thursday night, and I went into her home office. She usually kept the church ledger locked in a desk drawer, but she'd been getting slobby. Success makes people arrogant, I guess. I found the key in a decorative jar on the bookshelf. I opened that ledger, expecting to find proof of my own paranoia. Instead, I found a roadmap of betrayal. I'm an accountant by trade. Numbers are my language. And the language of this ledger was screaming. $500 here for emergency roof repair, $1,000 there for medical assistance for the Miller family. But the dates matched every single time she and Mark were busy. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I went to the bank the next day. I knew the manager, Sarah, since we'd gone to high school together, and I asked for copies of the cleared checks from the church's charity fund account. Sarah looked uneasy. "David, I shouldn't really, but since you're her husband and you've done the donator's checks before." She handed them over. When I saw the signatures on the back of those checks, I felt the room tilt. They weren't made out to contractors or hospitals. They were made out to cash, endorsed by Elena's elegant handwriting and deposited into a private account I'd never seen before. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a one-time thing. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a systematic robbery of the community's trust to fund a secret life. Every charity check was a weekend at a spa, a dinner at a 5-star restaurant, or a rental for a secluded cabin in the woods. They were literally stealing from the poor to fund their adultery. I knew exactly what I was going to do, but I had to be patient. I had to be cold. I didn't scream when she got home that night. I didn't throw the ledger at her. I sat there and ate the chicken piccata she'd picked up from the deli, listening to her talk about how exhausting it was to manage the church's finances. I watched her. I watched how she'd smile at me while her thumb was busy under the table, likely sending a miss you text to the man living 30 feet away. I watched how Mark would wave at me from his driveway the next morning, wearing the face of a friend while he was wearing clothes bought with stolen charity money. I spent the next 3 days acting completely normal. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, kissing her goodbye, telling her I loved her, all while I was coordinating with the people who were going to help me tear her world down. I even suggested we go out for a celebratory dinner on Friday night at the Hearth, the fanciest place in town, to mark her hard work with the church. She had no idea what was coming. She thought she was getting a reward. She didn't realize she was walking into a courtroom. The Hearth was glowing with candlelight when we arrived. It's the kind of spot where people go for anniversaries or big promotions. Elena wore a stunning black dress, looking every bit the virtuous, successful woman. We were led to a large round table in the center of the room. She looked confused as the hostess pulled out the chairs. "Why is this table so big, David? I thought it was just us."
I just smiled, though it felt like my face was made of stone. I thought we'd make it a group celebration. After all, your work for the church is a community effort, isn't it? That's when the door opened and Pastor Miller and Detective Brennan walked in. Brennan wasn't just a cop. He was the head of the church board and a longtime family friend. The color drained from Elena's face so fast, I thought she might actually hit the floor. She tried to stand up, her purse slipping from her lap, but I put a hand on hers. My grip wasn't aggressive, but it was firm. Her skin was ice cold, and she was starting to tremble. "Sit down, honey," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. "We're just waiting for one more person." Mark walked in 5 minutes later. He was wearing a new suede jacket, likely bought with the youth sports grant money, and he looked smug until he saw who was sitting at the table. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His eyes darted to the kitchen exit, then back to Elena. He looked like a trapped animal. I pulled out the ledger from my briefcase, the real one, the one I'd spent 48 hours cross-referencing with the bank statements and the private investigators' reports. I laid it on the white tablecloth like a death warrant. "So, Elena," I began, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand, "let's talk about the charity you've been providing lately." I was looking through the books, and I found some inconsistencies. "David, please," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the pastor, who looked like he was witnessing a car crash. "Not here. Let's go home and talk." "Oh, we're going to talk here," I said. I opened the ledger to a bookmarked page. "Let's talk about the $2,000 for the Widows Fund that actually paid for a 3-night stay at the Blue Ridge Resort last month. I have the receipt from the hotel, Elena. It has your name on it and Mark's." Mark made a move to get up, but Detective Brennan cleared his throat. "I'd stay put if I were you, Mark. We're discussing a significant amount of embezzled funds. This isn't just a domestic dispute anymore." Elena started to lie. It was instinctive for her. She started rambling about misunderstandings and temporary loans she meant to pay back. She even tried to blame a software glitch. But I dismantled every single word. I laid out the photos of them at the resort, photos of them kissing by the pool, laughing over champagne. I showed the deposit slips. I showed the receipt for Mark's new golf clubs, purchased with a check meant for the orphans' clothing drive. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the clinking of silverware from other tables, people blissfully unaware that a woman's entire life was evaporating 3 feet away. Elena's hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. She looked at Mark, pleading for him to say something, anything, to defend her. But Mark just stared at his empty water glass. He was a coward to the end. He wasn't going to go down with her. The moment she realized there was no way out, her face didn't just crumble, it vanished. The saint was gone, and in her place was a woman who had sold her soul for a few weekends of excitement and a neighbor who didn't even have the guts to look her in the eye. "How could you?" Pastor Miller asked, his voice thick with genuine hurt. Elena didn't answer. She couldn't. She just looked at me, and for a second, I saw the woman I'd married. But then I looked down at the ledger, at the stolen charity, and I realized I'd never really known her at all. I walked out of that restaurant alone, leaving her there with the detective and the pastor. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. I could actually breathe.
The divorce was quick. The evidence was so overwhelming that her lawyer basically told her to take whatever I offered and pray the church didn't pursue a full criminal trial. She was too terrified of the public shame and the potential prison time to fight me on anything. She lost the house, her reputation, and eventually she lost Mark, who dumped her the second she was no longer a fun secret and became a legal liability. I don't feel bitterness anymore. I feel a strange, quiet kind of peace. I kept the house, but I stripped the wallpaper and painted the walls of bright, clean white. I gave away that old porch furniture where we used to sit and talk about our perfect life. Sometimes I still pass the church and think about the charity fund. I made sure every cent was paid back out of her share of the house sale before I let her walk away. I'm not the man I was before. I'm more guarded, and I don't trust quite as easily. But I'm a man who knows the truth. And in the end, the truth didn't just set me free. It gave me my life back, and it's a life that isn't built on a foundation of stolen prayers.